Welcome to Career Tools. Today's cast, simple behavioral communication clues. Today, we describe 2 simple communication behaviors to help determine roughly what someone's DISC profile might be, and once you know that, what to do about it. Here we go. Okay, folks, sorry for the audio quality. I've gotten a couple comments about audio quality. Unfortunately, sometimes when we travel, as we are often doing for clients, if we're going to keep to our schedules of creating podcasts,
which we've never missed, right?
We have never missed.
Right.
Well, actually,
one Christmas
we did.
We took a week off.
We took a week off. But other than that, we've been. And sometimes you, at least once or twice, you had to record a podcast by yourself.
That's right.
Like, we're committed to doing this. So again, we actually do like producing high quality audio because we know it makes the listening experience a lot better. But occasionally,
and unfortunately, the business model of giving away all the stuff you know for free tends to compound in a way. Multiply. If you took 0 to the infinitieth power, you get 0, right? So we're here before a 2-day gig with a client. We were asked by a client who's a big fan through the podcast to come and spend 2 days with top 20 managers in his company, and so we're in a hotel together for a change.
So there you go. So okay, so enough. I guess that's enough of an apology. So let's talk about what we're going to talk about, which is looking at. Talking about communication styles, right? We get a lot of questions about DISC profiles, particularly when we provide them to clients at conferences, right? And those of you who have taken the DISC behavioral profile before know why we get those questions, because it is incredible. It's amazingly accurate, and frankly, one of the things I love about it, it's not about personality.
Yeah, it's about behavior, right? And in fact, I was going to say, you mentioned conferences. We've just started giving everybody who comes to the management conferences a DISC as well, and we weave that in a little bit. Not because we're terribly sold on DISC in isolation, but rather that we believe that the single most frequent thing that managers do is communicate. And communication is what the listener does. So that means you've got to understand where other people are coming from. And the way people tell you where they're coming from is how they behave. And by understanding how others behave and having a way to approach other people, not a label, but a way to approach, a way to see, a way to hear other people, you're going to be more effective. So, it really is accurate, and we love it.
Yeah, it's great. Now, the challenge that folks have with this sometimes, unless they've been to one of our communication conferences, is that they say, okay, I understand it. I've listened to some of your podcasts about DISC. I know how knowing somebody's DISC profile could help me be a better communicator, since communication is what the listener does, right? But not everybody I meet, or not all the important people I know or need to influence, have taken the DISC behavioral profile. So how do I use DISC when I don't, in fact, have a DISC profile of the person?
Right. Yeah. I think when I think about DISC, the thing I notice from having done it so many times with so many people is the first thing that happens, and it's a wonderful moment, and it's a powerful aha for almost everybody, is people go, wow, I answered 28 questions, and this thing's just nailed me. I feel totally figured out, right? Anybody who argues with their profile shows it to someone else, and then someone else goes, yep, that's you.
Yeah, exactly.
Although, as we've said before, don't tell your spouse, because your spouse will say, see, I told you so.
Exactly.
Right? But here's the thing. That aha moment, it gets into people's brains the idea that DISC is about them. And to an extent, it's true. But the fact that the DISC is about you doesn't reveal what the DISC's power is. The power is it gives you a way to unlock others, right? If you don't know someone's profile, they haven't taken it or they haven't shared it, it's still really not that difficult to begin to determine their primary tendency enough to be able to reduce significantly the chances of miscommunication and conflict when you're communicating with them. Now, here's the thing. DISC will not make you a fabulous communicator unless you use it for 5 or 10 years, if it's a way that you change the way you communicate. And I've done it, and Those of you who've been to the conference have seen me do it, and it works.
Yeah, but that's not the problem, though. That's not where people get in trouble.
Seeking success. What we want to do is minimize failure.
Exactly.
Right? The problem is the average communication engagement with somebody has a pretty good chance of failing, right? Whether because of role power or lack of understanding or lack of communication and so on. So basically what we say is DISC gives you a way to think about the way others behave. And at conferences, we actually tell them in an ECC, in 3 minutes, you're going to know enough about someone else's interaction with you to draw a conclusion and change your behavior and significantly reduce your chances for miscommunication. So to me, knowing that and being able to do it, learn it in 1 day and apply it in 3 minutes is huge. And so we thought we would just give a sense of some of the kinds of things we share at the conference. This is not a sales pitch. It's just we just want people to know this is something you can do without coming to the conference that will make you more effective almost immediately working with other people. So here are a couple of simple behaviors. Let's just agree there are a couple of simple behaviors we can look for that'll help all of us communicate with other people, okay? And we only have 4 points today. Should be a fairly quick cast. First, communication is just behavior. You've got to get that through your head. Communication is not the expression of personality. It's not rocket science. It's just words and behavior around it, and it's fairly straightforward, okay? Number 2, we recommend you use the basics behind DISC, and the 2 things that DISC asks is a particular person assertive or reserved, relatively speaking? And the other question is, do they tend to lean toward people things, or do they tend to lean toward task things? Mike's watching me right now and seeing me lean to the left or the right, or motioning toward up when I say assertive and down when I say reserved, for those of you who know DISC.
Which are all behaviors.
Right, yeah. So those are the 2 questions we ask, and it gives you, if you think about a circle with 4 quadrants, the top half is assertive, the bottom hemisphere is reserved, the right hemisphere is people, and the left hemisphere is task. And so the question we want to ask ourselves is, if I could spread the field a little bit, if I could think about is a person more this or more that, what might I look for? And that's what this cast is about. Our point 3 is, if you want to decide whether or not somebody's assertive or reserved, all you need to do is pay attention to whether they interrupt you when you're talking or whether there's a pause after you're done talking. It's as simple as that. That's all you need to do. Do they interrupt me? Do they talk before I'm finished talking, or do they tend to pause? If they interrupt, that's one data point to help you sense they're a more assertive person, so they tend to lean toward the top hemisphere, which is D or I. If they tend to pause when they're talking to you, if they wait until you're done, then they tend to be reserved, and then they tend to be more of an S or a C. And then the other question, our 4th point, is there's a distinction between people and task. And the question there is not interrupt or pause. The question is, do they smile or don't they? Right? If they smile, they tend to be people-based. And if they don't, they tend to be task-based. Now, it's not an either or. It's not as if people walk up to you and are smiling constantly. You say, ha! There's a people person, or somebody simply is so taciturn they never smile, although there are people like that. But rather, it's a relative choice you make by paying attention to the amount of smiling or not smiling you see from the other person. And to some degree, this depends upon your own tendency, your own bias, which we'll talk about. Okay? So, those are the 4 points. Communication is just behavior. We want you to use the underlying premises behind DISC, which is someone assertive or reserved, and do they tend to be people or task? And then we're going to give you a discriminator for assertiveness, interrupting or pausing, and we're going to give you a discriminator for people and task, which is smiling or not.
Excellent. So let's talk about the first point. Communication is just behavior. And before we get into the core of that particular point, I just want to note that this is one of the things I like about DISC, as opposed to, for example, Myers-Briggs or something like that.
Yeah,
right? Which
type
is that
systems,
one could make an argument that, forget the DISC profile and the number 7125 or anything like that, right? That literally you could almost go direct from a set of observable behaviors to how you treat someone.
Yeah, you don't have to use DISC.
You don't have to use DISC.
No,
exactly
right. DISC is a tool that's scientific, that gives us a great deal of scientific background and gives you incredible detail, but you and I never ever use the final details of DISC, the 7711 that I have, for instance. I never recommend somebody study my profile to try to figure me out. We recommend, is this person a high D or I, or are they a high S or a high C? It's very high level, right? It's the first level of analysis. You don't even have to understand understand D, I, S, or C. You just have to understand, are they more assertive than me or are they more reserved than me? And do they tend to talk about people or do they tend to talk about work? That's as simple as that.
As simple as that.
Yeah.
Right. You don't have to understand this.
No.
Just look at the two things. So,
Yeah.
Now, not to say that that there's not some value in understanding DISC a little bit more detail, but you can be 80% of the way there, at least simply by paying attention.
And
to
again,
these things.
that's really all that you need to be. That's one of the things I love about career tools and manager tools is we're not trying to make everybody into a CEO. We're trying to avoid everyone getting fired. We're trying to make everybody a competent, confident professional or a competent and confident manager, right? And if we can do that for every manager, for every professional, that's enormous. And there are too many people saying we all should aspire for the very, very top. No, not necessarily. Before we have a chance to aspire at the top, before we have a chance to build a 10,000 square foot house, let's make sure the foundation is solid, right? Manager tools, career tools, all about foundational stuff, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So, okay, so look.
And that is so different. This way of thinking about and observing people's behavior and then communicating based upon those behaviors is so different than what most people go through. Most people go through this arduous task of they observe a bunch of behaviors, but then they try to figure out what it means and where it came from, and
genetics and personality and upbringing and
and then they try to get to what the person's personality is, and then they try to match themselves to personality. It's so many levels removed from the actual behavior.
I literally had a boss in the Army say, I really wonder what your relationship with your dad was like. I'm like, what, sir? What are you talking about? I had to call him sir because he outranked me. Like, you do this and this and this and this. In my experience, I've seen people like that.
I know your history in the Army. I know not every person that outranked you called sir, but that's a different story, not for the air.
But I mean, it's like, sir, do you have a psychology degree? No, it's just something I do in my spare time, thinking about other people's motivations. No offense, folks. If you're thinking about your people's motivations, you're wasting your time because you're not smart enough to figure it out, and their motivations will change. But what we found is behaviors don't change all that much. One of the light bulbs moment we've had from our use of the basic premises behind DISC in terms of communicating more effectively is how often we make the work of communication hard. What most of us do is we interact, right? We watch and listen to their behaviors, and we literally, like you said, we try to guess at personality. And it just, I literally, if you were here, if you were like Mike, you'd see me with my head in my hands going, it's so frustrating. So look, everything that's interesting about this is that all the analysis, all the psychologizing, it's all in the service of predicting future behavior. That's why people do this stuff. That's why people talk about it, why they think about it. In other words, they say, let's watch their behavior now. Let's interpret, let's guess, let's analyze, let's psychologize about what that means. Then let's use all that to figure out what they're going to do the next time we interact with them. There are a couple of problems with this. The first is, as I said, we're not any good at it. You're not, folks, you're probably not a psychologist. Just because you got a psychology degree, you're not a psychologist. You're not a psychiatrist, certainly, right? Most of us anyway. We don't really know what somebody's background is. We don't know what their motivations are. And you're guessing at it, right? The other problem is that this is completely unnecessary. Let's not bother trying to guess at the motivations and intent. And by the way, DISC doesn't talk about that terribly much. It talks about behaviors. Let's not guess at the intent of somebody's behavior in order to determine what their future behavior is, when the easiest way to predict future behavior is to assume that their present behavior will be repeated in the future. And here's a great example. If you don't believe that statement to be true, folks, and I hope I don't sound like I'm on my high horse, because right now I'm on my high horse, so I'm trying to disguise it. If you don't believe that's true, let me tell you, the single most popular and prevalent, effective interviewing tool today in major organizations. I'm not saying it's the best. I'm not saying it's the final and end all and be all. But according to everything organizations know, although I've read stuff saying, behavioral interviewing is bad, but the most common effective tool for evaluating your ability to handle a future job is behavioral interviewing. And what is that? That is asking you about your past performance and then predicting, asking whether or not you have engaged in the behaviors in the past that you will need to have in the future in order to do the job that we have in mind for you.
Right. So if you wanted somebody who is a great project manager,
you'd look
for evidence that he or she is engaged in effective project management behaviors in the past, right?
I just read an article recently that says, that's experience is overrated because, there are people